London, February 1971. A backstage corridor at the Marquis Club, and the panic attack that would forge an unbreakable bond. When John Deacon joined Queen in February 1971, nobody expected the quiet electronic student from Leicester to become the band's secret emotional anchor. He was 20 years old, brilliantly talented, and so paralyzed by stage fright that he couldn't breathe. What happened in a cramped dressing room before Queen's first major concert would create a friendship so profound that it would endure through triumph, tragedy, and the final days when roles reversed and the silent one found his voice. This isn't just a story about overcoming fear. This is about the moment when two fundamentally different people discovered they understood each other's deepest vulnerabilities in ways nobody else could. And it's about a red ribbon that traveled through 2 decades, changing meaning but never losing its power. John Richard Deacon arrived at his Queen audition on a gray February afternoon in 1971, carrying his Rickenbacker bass in a battered case and wearing sensible clothes that immediately marked him as different. While other bass players had shown up in platform boots and velvet jackets, desperately trying to look like rock stars, John wore pressed corduroy trousers, a modest button-down shirt, and the reserved expression of someone who'd rather be solving equations than performing for strangers. The audition was held in a bare-bones rehearsal space at Imperial College. Brian May and Roger Taylor sat on folding chairs, having already auditioned 7 bass players that week. None had been right. Freddie Mercury stood near the window smoking a cigarette, studying each auditioner with intense focus. John set up his equipment with methodical precision, checking each connection twice, adjusting his amp settings with the careful attention of an engineer. Then he began to play. What came from his bass wasn't flashy or showy. It was perfect. Technically flawless, musically intelligent, serving the song rather than his ego. Brian and Roger exchanged glances after the first 30 seconds. This was their bassist. But something caught Freddie's attention. Throughout the audition, John barely looked up from his instrument. He answered questions with minimal words, his body language screaming discomfort with being observed. When the audition ended and John packed his equipment, Freddie followed him into the hallway and said something that would change everything. "You're quite good, you know," Freddie said, his voice carrying that distinctive blend of confidence and warmth. John looked up, startled. "Thank you. But you hate this, don't you?" Freddie asked. "The performing part, being watched." John hesitated, weighing whether honesty was wise. "I prefer the technical side, the music itself. The performance aspect is necessary, I suppose." Freddie smiled, something knowing and sad in his expression. "What if I told you I understand that more than you think?" John looked skeptical. Freddie Mercury, already developing his flamboyant stage persona, understanding stage fright? It seemed impossible. "You'll see," Freddie said mysteriously. "Welcome to Queen, darling. This is going to be quite a journey." But Freddie didn't tell John the full truth that day. He didn't mention the childhood stutter that had paralyzed him at boarding school. He didn't reveal that every performance was an act of calculated courage over crippling fear. That revelation would come later, in circumstances neither of them could imagine. 6 weeks passed in a blur of intensive rehearsals. Brian, Roger, and Freddie quickly discovered that John was everything they'd hoped for musically: precise, inventive, reliable. But they also noticed his intense quietness, his reluctance to speak during breaks, his tendency to disappear immediately after rehearsals ended. "He's a bit odd, isn't he?" Roger said one evening after John had vanished within minutes of finishing. "Not odd," Brian corrected. "Private. There's a difference." Freddie said nothing, but he'd been watching John more carefully than the others realized. As the Marquis concert approached, the pressure intensified. This wasn't just another gig. This was Queen's first major London booking, with their complete lineup, their chance to prove to the industry that they were the real deal. Music journalists would be there, record label representatives, industry insiders who could make or break a band's career. For Brian, Roger, and Freddie, the pressure was exciting. For John, it was becoming unbearable. He began having trouble sleeping, lying awake imagining 300 pairs of eyes watching him, judging him, waiting for him to fail. During rehearsals, his playing remained technically perfect, but his anxiety was building like a pressure cooker with no release valve. He didn't tell anyone, John Deacon had been raised in a working-class Lexter family where emotions were private matters. Real men didn't discuss fear, so John said nothing, showed up to rehearsals, played perfectly, and privately spiraled deeper into dread. The afternoon of the Marquis concert, John sat alone in his room staring at his bass. His hands were already trembling uncontrollably. His heart raced despite complete physical stillness. His breathing had gone rapid and shallow, that distinctive panicked breathing that feels like suffocating. The thought of walking onto that stage, of 300 strangers watching his every move, felt impossible. Literally, physically impossible. John considered calling Brian to say he was sick. He reached for the phone twice, but each time his upbringing stopped him. You don't break commitments. You don't let people down. So John picked up his bass case with shaking hands and headed to the club, certain he was walking toward his own destruction. The dressing room at the Marquis Club was tiny, dingy, and overcrowded. All 4 members of Queen plus their minimal road crew were crammed into a space barely large enough for the equipment. The walls were painted institutional green, that specific shade designed to be calming but achieving the opposite effect. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and nervous energy. A single bare light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows. Brian obsessively checked his red special guitar. Roger did elaborate stretches and vocal warm-ups. Freddie sat at a grimy mirror applying makeup, transforming himself from Farrokh Bulsara into Freddie Mercury. John sat in the corner, bass across his lap, pretending to tune, even though his hands were shaking too badly. Nobody noticed his distress until it was too late. That's when John felt it begin in earnest. His chest tightened like someone was sitting on it. His vision started tunneling, the edges going dark and fuzzy. His hands went completely numb. His heart wasn't just racing, it was slamming against his ribs so violently he was certain everyone could see his shirt moving. He couldn't get enough air. Each breath felt like trying to breathe through a straw. The dressing room walls seemed to close in. The sounds around him became distorted and distant. I'm dying, John thought with absolute certainty. I'm having a heart attack. I'm 20 years old and I'm dying in a dressing room. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support his weight. John stumbled, catching himself against the wall, his bass guitar clattering to the floor with a discordant crash that finally got everyone's attention. John? Brian turned immediately, concern flooding his face. Are you all right? John tried to answer but couldn't form words. His throat had closed completely. He was making awful gasping sounds, hands clawing at his chest. Roger jumped to his feet. Christ, is he having a heart attack? Should we call an ambulance? But Freddie moved with immediate certainty. He was across the room in 3 strides, kneeling in front of John. His hands gripped John's shoulders, gently but firmly. Everyone out, Freddie said, his voice carrying absolute authority. Now, give us the room. Brian started to protest, but something in Freddie's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Brian and Roger exchanged uncertain glances but filed out. The door closed, immediately muting the sounds from above. The tiny dressing room suddenly felt enormous with just 2 people. Freddie gently guided John to slide down the wall until they were both sitting on the grimy floor, backs against the paint, shoulders deliberately touching. Look at me, John, Freddie said softly. Right here. Just my eyes. Nothing else exists right now except you, me, and this moment. John's terrified eyes found Freddie's. I can't breathe. The words came out in strangled gasps. Yes, you can, Freddie said with absolute certainty. You're breathing right now. It feels wrong, I know. But you're getting air. Your body knows what to do. We're just going to help it remember. Freddie began breathing in an exaggerated way. Long, slow inhale through the nose, deliberate pause, long, slow exhale through the mouth. With me now. In through your nose. Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. John tried and failed completely. It's perfectly all right, Freddie said without judgment. Try again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Gradually, painfully, John's breathing began to synchronize with Freddie's rhythm. The hyperventilation slowed. The tunnel vision started to recede. They sat together on that dirty floor, breathing in perfect unison for nearly 10 minutes. Finally, John's breathing approached normal. His hands stopped shaking quite so violently. Better? Freddie asked. John nodded. Good. Now I'm going to tell you something I've never told Brian or Roger. Freddie shifted slightly, still maintaining that crucial shoulder contact. His voice dropped to something quieter, more vulnerable than John had ever heard. When I was 7 years old in Zanzibar, my parents sent me to boarding school in India, St. Peter's School in Panchgani. Do you know what it's like to be 7 years old, shipped away from your family, surrounded by strangers who mock everything about you that's different? John shook his head. I developed a severe stutter, Freddie continued slowly. Couldn't speak in class without my throat closing up. The moment I had to speak in front of others, my throat would close exactly like yours just did. My heart would race exactly like yours was racing. I'd go completely mute. For 3 years, I barely spoke at that school. He paused. The other boys thought I was stupid. The teachers thought I was defiant. Nobody understood that I was absolutely terrified. John found his voice still shaky. But you're the most confident performer I've ever seen. How did you? Freddie's smile was sad and knowing. That's not confidence, darling. That's armor. That's a character I created, Freddie Mercury, who isn't afraid of anything. But Farrokh Bulsara, the boy inside, he's still terrified every single time. He just learned to hide it behind makeup and costumes so theatrical that nobody looks close enough to see the fear underneath. He looked directly at John. I know exactly what you're feeling. The terror that everyone's watching you, judging you, waiting for you to fail. The certainty that you're not good enough, that you don't belong. Yes, John whispered. Exactly that. The fear doesn't go away, Freddie said. It never completely goes away. But you learn to do it anyway. Not because you stop being afraid, because you find something stronger than the fear. Freddie reached into his makeup bag and pulled out a small spool of red satin ribbon. He cut a length about 8 inches long with scissors from his kit. Give me your base. John hesitated, then handed over his Rickenbacker. Freddie began tying the red ribbon around the neck of the bass, just above the nut where it wouldn't interfere with playing but would be constantly visible. This ribbon represents something important, Freddie said, working the knot carefully. When you're on that stage and the fear starts creeping back, and it will, I want you to look at this. Remember that you're not alone up there. I'm right beside you. Brian's on your left. Roger's behind you. We're a unit. If you stumble, we catch you. If you forget, we cover. If you panic, we ground you. He held the base out to John, the ribbon bright against the dark finish. Second, I want you to remember that the fear you're feeling means you care. That's not weakness, John. That's proof you're human. The day you stop feeling nervous is the day it stops meaning anything. John took the base, fingers touching the soft ribbon. What if I freeze out there? Then you stand there and let the fear wash through you until it passes, Freddie said simply. And we keep playing around you until you can join back in. But that won't happen. Want to know why? Why? Because you're not playing for that crowd. You're playing for us, for your bandmates. Just play for me, John. Forget the 300 people beyond the lights. There are only 4 people who matter on that stage, and all of them already know you're brilliant. There was a knock on the door. 5 minutes. Freddie stood, offering his hand. John took it. Ready? Freddie asked. John looked at the ribbon. No, but I'll do it anyway. Freddie's smile transformed his face. That, darling, is courage. Queen took the stage to enthusiastic applause. The lights were blinding. The crowd was a dark mass barely visible. John felt the fear rising again, that crushing weight on his chest. But then Freddie caught his eye and nodded toward the base, toward the red ribbon. John's fingers found it, touching it like a talisman. He looked at Freddie, who was watching with complete confidence. Brian counted off the first song. John's fingers found the opening bass line. They were shaky for the first few bars, but muscle memory took over. By the second verse, he'd found his rhythm. By the chorus, he'd almost forgotten to be afraid. Whenever the fear tried to creep back, John would glance at the ribbon, then at Freddie. Every single time, Freddie was watching, ready with an encouraging nod or quick smile. How could John be terrified when Freddie was prancing across stage in platform boots, commanding the audience with pure theatrical audacity? The concert was a triumph. Queen's performance established them as a serious force. Music journalists scribbled enthusiastic notes. The audience demanded encores. And John Deacon, who'd nearly quit from Panic just an hour earlier, had played flawlessly. The red ribbon became permanent on John's bass. Over the next 2 decades, through countless concerts and the rise to global superstardom, that ribbon remained tied to his Rickenbacker. It faded with time, the bright red becoming muted and dusty. But John never removed it, never replaced it. Their friendship deepened in ways that surprised everyone. John and Freddie were opposites in almost every way. One theatrical and flamboyant, one reserved and technical. One craved attention, one avoided it. But they understood each other's hidden depths. Freddie knew that John's quietness masked profound emotional sensitivity. John knew that Freddie's confidence masked profound insecurity. They protected each other's secrets. When Freddie's relationships fell apart, John would arrive at Garden Lodge with no questions, just companionship. When John struggled with fame's pressures, Freddie knew when to create distraction and when to provide space. In interviews, Freddie would credit John as Queen's foundation. "He's the iceberg," Freddie said once. "You see just the tip, the brilliant bassist. But underneath is this massive structure of talent and loyalty that holds everything together." November 1991 brought the reversal nobody expected. Freddie was dying, and everyone who loved him was watching helplessly as AIDS destroyed his body. He'd withdrawn to Garden Lodge, seeing only his closest circle. John visited regularly, but these visits had become increasingly difficult. The vibrant presence that had knelt beside John 20 years earlier was now a frail figure struggling to walk. One gray afternoon, John arrived and was warned by Jim Hutton that Freddie was having a rough day. "The breathing is very difficult. He's quite anxious." John found Freddie in bed, clearly struggling. His breathing was labored, each breath requiring visible effort. His face was drawn with pain. His hands trembled. "I'm sorry, John," Freddie whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not very good company today. The fear is quite overwhelming, if I'm honest." John pulled a chair beside the bed and did something that shocked even himself. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a length of red satin ribbon, the same type Freddie had tied to his bass 20 years earlier. Slowly, deliberately, John tied the ribbon around his own left wrist. Freddie's eyes widened with recognition. "John, I know exactly what it is," John said quietly. "It's my turn now, Fred. You've spent 20 years being strong for me, for all of us. You made me believe I could perform when I was certain I'd fail. So now it's my turn. Now I'm here. Now I get to be strong for you." Freddie's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so afraid, John," he whispered. "Not of dying, but of leaving all of you. Of this being the end. Of the fear finally winning." John took Freddie's trembling hand in both of his. "The fear doesn't win, Fred. Remember what you taught me? The fear doesn't go away, but you do it anyway. You find something stronger than the fear." "What's stronger?" Freddie asked. "Love," John said simply. "Us. We're stronger than any fear. You're not alone. I'm right here. Brian's with you. Roger's with you. We're still a unit. If you stumble, we catch you. If you forget, we cover. If you're afraid, we ground you. That's what you taught us." Freddie was crying openly, gripping John's hand. "I don't remember teaching you to be this eloquent." John smiled through his own tears. "You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing it anyway. So that's what we're doing. We're being afraid together, but we're doing it anyway. And this time, I get to be the one who reminds you that you're not alone."